Lauren Ashley was only 18 years old, standing at the very beginning of her life. She had just graduated from high school in Wayland, Massachusetts. College was ahead of her. Independence was calling. To her family and friends, Lauren was bright, kind, and hopeful, someone who believed her future was still wide open. She loved music, spending time with friends, and dreaming about the life she was about to build on her own. But during the summer after graduation in 2011, something quietly shifted. Lauren had recently ended her relationship with her boyfriend Nathaniel Fuja. It wasn't a dramatic breakup. There was no explosive argument, no public scene. Lauren simply wanted space. She wanted peace. She wanted to move forward into adulthood without being tied to a relationship that no longer felt right. For Lauren, the breakup was closure. For Nathaniel, it was not. People who later looked back at the relationship would describe Nathaniel as someone who struggled deeply with anger and emotional instability. He had trouble expressing his feelings, and when Lauren ended the relationship, those feelings didn't disappear, they intensified. Friends and investigators would later say that he could not accept that the relationship was truly over. On July 3, 2011, Lauren told her father she was going out. There was nothing unusual about it. She was 18, newly graduated, enjoying the freedom of summer. No one could have imagined that it would be the last time her family saw her alive. When Lauren didn't come home that night, concern slowly turned into fear. Her phone went unanswered. Friends didn't know where she was. Her family searched, hoping that she had simply stayed over at someone's house or lost track of time. As the hours passed, the sense that something was wrong became impossible to ignore. The following morning, July 4, 2011, police made a devastating discovery. Lauren's body was found in a marshy area near Water Row in Wayland. The quiet holiday morning became a nightmare for her family and an entire community. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death. Lauren had been strangled with a bungee cord. Her neck had also been cut. The violence was personal, deliberate, and horrifying. This was not an accident. It was not random. Someone had intended to end her life. Investigators immediately began retracing Lauren's final hours. They reviewed her recent messages, her phone records, and her movements. They spoke to friends, family members, and anyone who had contact with her in the days leading up to her death. Very quickly, their attention turned toward Nathaniel Fuja. The breakup had been recent. The emotions surrounding it were intense. And as police looked deeper, troubling details emerged. When investigators searched Nathaniel's home, what they found painted a disturbing picture. There were bloodstains in multiple areas inside the garage, on a door handle in the kitchen, in the bathroom, and along the stairs. Even more chilling, investigators discovered a pair of shoes hidden in the attic. Those shoes were stained with Lauren's blood. The physical evidence told a story that could not be ignored. Prosecutors later explained that the crime had unfolded shortly after Lauren left her home. Evidence showed that she had gone to Nathaniel's house. What happened next was an eruption of rage. When Lauren refused to return to the relationship, prosecutors argued Nathaniel lost control. The case moved to trial in early 2013. Inside the courtroom, Lauren's name was spoken again and again, but she was no longer there to speak for herself. Her family listened as details of her final moments were laid bare. Nathaniel's defense team argued that he was suffering from mental health issues at the time of the crime. They suggested that his emotional state impaired his judgment, but prosecutors pushed back, saying that emotional distress did not excuse deliberate violence. They presented the jury with the forensic evidence, the blood patterns, the timeline, the items hidden away in the attic. They argued that this was not a moment of confusion, but an act driven by possessiveness and rage, and inability to accept rejection. On March 7, 2013, the jury reached its decision. Nathaniel Fuja was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the harshest punishment allowed under Massachusetts law. For Lauren's family, the verdict brought accountability but not peace. Their daughter was gone forever. In the years that followed, Lauren's parents chose to transform their grief into purpose. They began speaking publicly about healthy relationships, emotional boundaries, and warning signs of control. They wanted young people to understand that love should never feel like fear, and that walking away from a relationship should never cost someone their life. Even years later, the case did not fully fade. In 2025, Nathaniel's legal team requested that the state's highest court review the case again, citing concerns about his mental health at the time of the crime. The court agreed to hear the arguments, but the conviction remained unchanged. More than a decade later, Lauren Ashley's story still stands as a haunting reminder of how dangerous rejection can become when someone refuses to let go. She was not reckless. She was not cruel. She simply wanted to move forward. And for that, she paid the ultimate price. Emma Walker was 16 years old when her life was taken, still a teenager, still figuring out who she wanted to be. She lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and attended Central High School, where she was known as a bright, energetic student. Emma loved being a cheerleader. She loved her friends. She was close to her family, and like many young people her age, she was learning how to navigate her first serious relationships. One of those relationships was with a boy named Riley Gall. At first, the relationship seemed typical, two teenagers spending time together, sharing emotions that felt intense because everything was new. But by mid-2016, Emma began to feel uneasy. The relationship no longer felt safe or healthy. She wanted calm. She wanted distance. And eventually, she made a decision that should have protected her. She ended the relationship. Emma told Riley she wanted it to be over. She did not want drama. She did not want confrontation. She simply wanted space to live her life. To Emma, the breakup was a boundary, clear, firm, and final. But to Riley, it was something else entirely. After the breakup, Riley refused to accept Emma's decision. According to court records, his behavior changed quickly. He began sending her repeated messages. When she tried to ignore him, he found new ways to reach her. When she blocked him, he found ways around it. He showed up where she was. He lingered near her home. He created situations designed to pull her attention back to him. Friends later testified that Emma was becoming worried. She told people close to her that Riley would not leave her alone. He would message her, saying he was hurt, sick, or in trouble, hoping guilt would make her respond. These weren't romantic gestures. They were warning signs. Emma tried to move on anyway. She went to school. She practiced cheerleading. She spent time with friends and family. Outwardly, she kept living her life. But behind the scenes, she was dealing with the quiet fear that comes when someone refuses to respect the word no. Everything changed in the early hours of November 21st, 2016. That night, Emma was asleep in her bedroom. She had no idea that Riley Gall was outside her home. While her family slept inside, Riley stood in the dark with a 9mm handgun. According to investigators, he positioned himself outside Emma's bedroom wall. Then, without warning, he fired. 2 shots were discharged through the wall of the house. One of the bullets struck Emma in the head as she slept in her bed. There was no struggle, no chance to run, no opportunity to protect herself. When Emma's parents went to wake her for school later that morning, they found her unresponsive. Panic set in immediately. Emergency services were called, but there was nothing anyone could do. Emma Walker had died in her own bedroom, killed by someone who once claimed to care about her. Police launched an immediate investigation. They determined that the shots had come from outside the home. This was not an accident. It was not a crime of passion inside the house. It was a calculated act. As detectives began piecing together the timeline, Riley Gall quickly became the focus. Evidence showed that he had been in the area during the night. Investigators also learned that after the shooting, Riley had attempted to dispose of the weapon. He enlisted the help of friends, college students, who later cooperated with police to hide the gun. That decision would come back to haunt him. Within 24 hours of Emma's death, Riley Gall was arrested. Police questioned him extensively. They reviewed his messages to Emma. They examined phone records, witness statements, and the recovered firearm. Each piece of evidence strengthened the case against him. In May 2018, Riley Gall went on trial for first-degree murder. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative. They showed the jury how Riley's behavior escalated after the breakup, how he could not accept Emma's independence. They presented messages that revealed obsession, jealousy, and entitlement. They argued that Riley did not see Emma as her own person, but as someone he believed he could not lose. The prosecution emphasized one central point: Emma had done nothing wrong. She had ended a relationship. That was her right. The defense attempted to argue that Riley was emotionally distressed and heartbroken, but prosecutors made it clear that heartbreak does not justify violence, and especially not premeditated murder. The jury reviewed the evidence carefully. They saw how Riley positioned himself outside Emma's bedroom. They heard testimony about his efforts to hide the gun. They learned about the messages he sent after the breakup and how his actions showed planning, not panic. The verdict was guilty. Riley Gall was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 51 years, the standard sentence under Tennessee law. For Emma's family, the sentence meant Riley would spend most of his life behind bars. But no sentence could bring Emma back. Emma Walker's death sent shockwaves through her community. Parents, students, and teachers struggled to understand how a teenage breakup could end in such unimaginable violence. Her case became a powerful example used by advocacy groups to educate young people about warning signs in relationships, especially the danger of obsession after rejection. Emma did everything she was supposed to do. She recognized an unhealthy relationship, she set boundaries, she tried to move forward. And yet, she was killed for saying no. Her story remains a painful reminder that rejection can be deadly when someone refuses to let go, and that controlling behavior, even in young relationships, should never be ignored. Matthew Reardon was someone people trusted in their most vulnerable moments. He worked as a nurse in the emergency department at Mercy Hospital in Portland, Maine, a place where fear, pain, and uncertainty were part of everyday life. In that environment, Matthew stood out for his calm presence. Coworkers described him as gentle, steady, and deeply compassionate. He was the kind of nurse who spoke softly, moved deliberately, and made patients feel safe, even when everything else felt out of control. Just days before his death, Matthew had helped save the life of a 91-year-old woman experiencing a medical emergency. To him, this wasn't extraordinary, it was simply part of who he was. Outside the hospital, however, Matthew was dealing with a personal transition. He had recently ended a romantic relationship with his former boyfriend, Patrick Milliner. According to friends and public records, the breakup was clear and intentional. Matthew believed the relationship had reached its end and that both of them would move on. For Matthew, the relationship was over. For Patrick, it was not. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Patrick's emotional state began to deteriorate. His online posts showed deep sadness, loneliness, and a sense of hopelessness. Friends later said his messages felt heavy, as if he was struggling to imagine a future without Matthew. Still, there were no direct threats, no warnings that suggested violence was imminent, nothing that clearly signaled what was about to happen. That absence of obvious danger would later make the case even harder to understand. On November 30th, 2013, events reached a devastating conclusion. Records later confirmed that Patrick purchased a handgun the day before. Investigators believe this decision was deliberate, not impulsive. Early that morning, Patrick went to Matthew's apartment at 318 Main Street in Westbrook, Maine. What happened next unfolded quickly. According to police findings, Patrick entered the apartment and shot Matthew, causing fatal injuries to his head and chest. There was no prolonged struggle, no chance for escape. The violence was sudden and overwhelming. Shortly after killing Matthew, Patrick turned the gun on himself and took his own life. When police arrived, both men were found near the entryway of the apartment. The case was officially ruled a murder-suicide. News of Matthew's death spread quickly through Mercy Hospital. Shock turned into grief as colleagues tried to process the loss of someone who had dedicated his life to caring for others. Nurses and doctors who had worked side by side with Matthew described him as kind, dependable, and unfailingly patient. Many said he had a calming smile and a reassuring voice, qualities that mattered deeply in the chaos of an emergency room. Authorities classified the incident as domestic violence, a designation that challenged many assumptions. This was not a loud argument that spiraled out of control. It was not a public confrontation. It was a quiet private act rooted in emotional despair following a breakup. As investigators reviewed Patrick's digital footprint, they found long emotional posts written in the days before the shooting. The messages spoke of heartbreak and confusion. They showed someone drowning in emotional pain, but they did not contain threats. There were no declarations of violence, no warnings that could have easily alerted others to the danger. This detail made the tragedy especially haunting. Matthew had no opportunity to protect himself. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. There were no signs of a struggle that extended beyond the apartment walls. Everything happened in silence behind a closed door, leaving no time for intervention. In the aftermath, the focus shifted away from the violence and toward the life Matthew had lived. Mercy Hospital released statements honoring his dedication and the care he gave every patient. Coworkers shared stories of moments when Matthew stayed late to comfort someone who was scared or stepped in calmly during emergencies when others felt overwhelmed. Friends remembered his warmth, his humor, and his ability to listen without judgment. His family mourned not only the man he was, but the future he would never have, the career he was building, the lives he would have touched, the quiet moments of kindness that would never come. Community organizations later referenced Matthew's case when discussing emotional distress after breakups and the importance of mental health support. Experts explained that intense feelings of loss, when combined with isolation and hopelessness, can push someone toward irreversible decisions if they do not seek help. Matthew Raridan's story does not fit the familiar narrative of jealousy or control escalating into rage. Instead, it reveals something more subtle and just as dangerous. It shows how emotional collapse can turn inward and then outward with devastating consequences. Matthew did what many people believe is the right thing. He ended a relationship honestly. He focused on his work. He trusted that clarity and time would allow both people to move forward. But for someone who could not imagine life after that loss, the end of the relationship became unbearable. This case stands as a painful reminder that emotional suffering does not always announce itself with anger or threats. Sometimes it appears as quiet despair. Sometimes it hides behind sadness. And sometimes, when left unaddressed, it destroys lives that should never have been touched by violence. Angela Gilpin wanted her life back. In 2009, Angela had made a decision that should have brought relief, not fear. She chose to end an affair with a man named David Hoser and return fully to her marriage with her husband Rodney Gilpin. Angela wanted stability. She wanted safety. She wanted to repair the life she had nearly lost. Rodney welcomed her back. Friends described him as a quiet, hardworking man who wanted nothing more than peace in his home. Together, Angela and Rodney tried to move forward, believing that the past could be left behind. But for David Hoser, the relationship was not over. What Angela saw as a closed chapter, David saw as rejection, and that rejection slowly turned into anger. In the weeks after Angela ended the affair, people close to her noticed a change. She seemed uneasy. She confided in friends that David was not letting go. His behavior became unsettling. He contacted her repeatedly. He made her feel watched. According to court records, Angela grew increasingly afraid that David might hurt her. Her fear was serious enough that she took action. Angela filed for a protective order. This was not a dramatic gesture. It was a quiet acknowledgement that she no longer felt safe. She was trying to do everything right, setting boundaries, asking for legal protection, choosing distance instead of confrontation. But legal paperwork could not stop what was already building inside David. On September 28, 2009, Angela and Rodney were inside their home in Jefferson City, Missouri. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. There was no sign that danger was moments away. Then the gunshots came. When police arrived, they found both Angela and Rodney dead from gunshot wounds. The scene was devastating. 2 lives had been taken inside the place where they should have felt safest. Very quickly, investigators began searching for answers. David Hoser became the primary suspect almost immediately. Detectives learned that David had been growing more unstable after the affair ended. When police located him, they made a chilling discovery. Inside his vehicle were approximately 15 firearms. Among them was a weapon assembled from a kit resembling a small machine-style gun. Investigators also found a handwritten note that suggested David knew law enforcement was looking for him. The note reflected resentment and emotional turmoil tied directly to the end of the relationship. Although investigators did not find DNA or fingerprints placing David inside the Gilpin home, prosecutors argued that the circumstantial evidence told a powerful story. His access to weapons, his emotional fixation on Angela, the protective order, and his behavior after the killings all pointed in one direction. This case would become a study in how obsession can escalate even when someone tries to walk away peacefully. During the trial, prosecutors focused on motive. They argued that David could not accept that Angela had chosen her husband over him. The affair had ended, but David's sense of entitlement had not. To him, the relationship did not belong solely to Angela, it belonged to him. The defense emphasized the lack of direct forensic evidence. They pointed out that no physical proof placed David at the crime scene, but prosecutors reminded the jury that not all crimes leave neat fingerprints behind. Sometimes, motive, behavior, and preparation speak louder than DNA. Ultimately, the court dismissed the charge related to Rodney's death for reasons not fully explained in public records. However, the charge for Angela's murder remained, and the jury was convinced. David Hoser was found guilty of murdering Angela Gilpin. On November 27, 2013, he was sentenced to death. The punishment reflected the severity of the crime and the belief that the killing was intentional and driven by personal rage rather than momentary loss of control. For Angela's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not peace. Angela had tried to protect herself. She had recognized danger, she had reached out for legal help, and still she was killed. Rodney's family also mourned a man who had done nothing wrong, caught in the aftermath of a relationship he never chose to be part of. He was killed simply for standing beside his wife. Years later, David continued to claim his innocence. Appeals were filed. Legal arguments were reviewed, but none of them changed the outcome. The courts upheld the conviction and the sentence. On June 11, 2024, David Hoser was executed by lethal injection in Missouri. The case drew renewed attention because it highlighted something deeply unsettling. Angela did everything society tells people to do when they feel unsafe. She ended the relationship. She chose distance. She sought legal protection, yet none of it was enough to stop someone who refused to accept her choice. Angela and Rodney's story is not just about an affair gone wrong. It is about ownership, the dangerous belief that another person's life, love, or loyalty can be taken by force when it is no longer freely given. Their deaths left families shattered and a community searching for answers that would never fully come. And their case remains a stark reminder that leaving a relationship can be the most dangerous moment of all, especially when the person being left refuses to let go. Do you want me to continue with Case 5? Travis Alexander was the kind of person who believed in self-improvement. Friends described him as outgoing, optimistic, and deeply focused on building a better future. He worked in sales, stayed active in his community, and often spoke about goals, discipline, and faith. To people who knew him, Travis was someone who tried to live with intention. In 2006, Travis met Jodi Arias at a work-related event. At first, the connection felt exciting. They spent time together, talked often, and quickly became emotionally involved. But as the relationship progressed, it became unstable. Friends later said the relationship was intense, marked by emotional highs and lows, frequent arguments, and repeated breakups. They would separate, then reconnect, again and again. Even after they officially broke up, Jodi moved from California to Arizona so she could be closer to Travis. She joined the same church he attended. She stayed connected to his life even as he tried to create distance. To Travis, the relationship was no longer healthy. To Jodi, the separation was not final. By early 2008, Travis made it clear that he wanted to move forward on his own. He was planning a work trip to Mexico in June and intended to go with another woman. Prosecutors later said this detail deeply upset Jodi. It reinforced what she already feared, that Travis was truly leaving her behind. Despite this, Travis continued trying to keep the peace. He did not confront her aggressively. He did not publicly shame her. Instead, he tried to be polite while quietly pulling away. But the emotional tension did not disappear. Friends later testified that Travis felt uneasy. He believed Jodi's behavior had become unpredictable. There were signs that she was monitoring him, showing up unexpectedly, sending frequent messages, and refusing to fully let go. On June 4, 2008, Jodi traveled from California to Travis's home in Mesa, Arizona. According to court records, the two spent time together that day. What happened inside the house would later become the focus of one of the most closely watched trials in modern true crime history. 5 days later, on June 9th, friends became worried when they had not heard from Travis. He was usually reliable. When he missed work and stopped responding to calls, they knew something was wrong. Concerned friends went to his house. Inside the bathroom, they found him. Travis Alexander was dead. Police later confirmed that he had suffered extreme violence. He had been stabbed dozens of times, his neck had been deeply cut, and he had been shot in the head. The brutality shocked even experienced investigators. This was not a momentary loss of control. It was prolonged, personal, and overwhelming. Detectives began collecting evidence immediately. They reviewed phone records, travel receipts, and photographs taken inside the home. They discovered images on a camera found in the washing machine photos that appeared to show Travis injured and struggling during the attack. All evidence pointed toward Jodi Arias. When questioned by police, Jodi gave multiple versions of events. Her story changed repeatedly. At first, she denied being in Arizona. Later, she claimed masked intruders had attacked them. Eventually, she admitted to killing Travis, but said she acted in self-defense. Prosecutors argued that her shifting stories revealed deception, not confusion. The trial began in 2010 and quickly became a national spectacle. The courtroom heard months of testimony about the relationship, its intensity, its instability, and the emotional control that seemed to grow stronger as Travis tried to leave. Prosecutors painted a picture of obsession. They argued that Jodi could not accept rejection and could not tolerate the idea of Travis moving on with someone else. According to the state, the violence was driven by jealousy and rage, not fear. The defense argued that Travis had been emotionally abusive and that Jodi had acted to protect herself. They described a toxic relationship on both sides. But prosecutors countered with forensic evidence, timelines, and the sheer extent of the violence. On May 8, 2013, the jury returned its verdict. Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. After additional sentencing proceedings, she received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict closed one chapter of the case, but the story continued to echo far beyond the courtroom. For Travis's family and friends, the trial forced them to relive the most painful moments of his life in public view. They remembered him not for the violence that ended his life, but for the optimism and belief he carried into everything he did. The case became one of the most discussed examples of how obsession can grow when one person refuses to accept the end of a relationship. It showed how emotional attachment, when combined with jealousy and control, can escalate into devastating violence. Travis wanted to move on. He wanted space. He wanted a future that no longer included the relationship. And for that, he was brutally killed. His story remains a warning that sometimes the most dangerous moment in a relationship is not the argument, but the moment someone decides to leave. Sherry Rasmussen was building a life she was proud of. At 29 years old, she was a respected nurse and nursing director in Los Angeles, driven, compassionate, and deeply committed to her work. Colleagues described her as confident and capable, someone younger nurses looked up to for guidance. She loved her career, valued her family, and believed she had found stability with the man she married. That man was John Ruetten. Before John met Sherry, he had dated a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. The relationship had ended, but from Stephanie's perspective, it never truly closed. Even after John moved on, Stephanie continued to reach out letters, visits, attempts to stay connected. What John saw as a past chapter, Stephanie saw as something unfinished. Sherry was aware of this history. She had told her parents and close friends that Stephanie's presence unsettled her. According to those who knew her, Stephanie had shown up uninvited at the couple's home at least once. Sherry felt watched, uneasy. She sensed that the former relationship still carried emotional weight for Stephanie that went far beyond normal heartbreak. Then, on February 24th, 1986, everything changed. John left the house early that morning for work. Sherry stayed behind, planning to attend a training session later that day. When John returned home in the evening, the house was in disarray. Furniture had been shifted, a window was broken. The scene looked like a forced entry. Inside the living room, John found Sherry dead. She had been beaten and shot 3 times. Police arrived quickly and began their investigation. From the start, detectives believed the crime was a home invasion. The ransacked appearance of the house reinforced that theory. Investigators focused on male suspects, local criminal activity, and possible robbery motives. The idea that the killer might be someone Sherry knew, someone tied to John's past, was not seriously explored. And so the case went cold. For years, Sherry's family lived with unanswered questions. They believed something had been missed. They remembered Sherry's fears about Stephanie Lazarus, but those concerns were never placed at the center of the investigation. Time passed, evidence aged, leads disappeared. More than 2 decades later, in 2009, cold case detectives reopened the file. This time, they looked at the evidence differently. One detail stood out, a bite mark on Sherry's arm. In 1986, DNA technology was limited, but by 2009, advances in forensic science made it possible to extract and analyze genetic material preserved in the wound. When the results came back, they were shocking. The DNA belonged to a woman. That single discovery overturned the foundation of the original investigation. Detectives realized the crime scene may have been staged to look like a home invasion. Their attention returned to people connected emotionally to the victim and to John. The evidence pointed to one person: Stephanie Lazarus. By 2009, Stephanie was no longer just an ex-girlfriend. She was a veteran detective with the Los Angeles Police Department. Quietly, investigators began building their case. They collected Stephanie's DNA from a discarded cup to confirm the match. It was conclusive. In June 2009, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested and charged with murder. The arrest stunned the public. A cold case killer who had been working in law enforcement for years. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Stephanie never accepted John's marriage to Sherry. They presented evidence showing Stephanie's lingering emotional attachment and her resentment towards Sherry. According to the prosecution, Stephanie confronted Sherry on the day of the murder. They argued that jealousy and rage fueled the attack, and that Stephanie staged the break-in afterward to mislead investigators. Her training as a police officer, prosecutors said, helped her understand how to divert suspicion away from herself. The defense claimed the evidence was circumstantial and argued that the passage of time made the case unreliable. But the DNA told a different story. The bite mark placed Stephanie at the scene during the struggle. In March 2012, the jury reached its verdict. Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. For Sherry Rasmussen's family, the verdict brought a painful sense of closure delayed by more than 20 years. They finally had answers, but they also faced the reality that justice had taken decades to arrive. Sherry's case became one of the most well-known examples of a cold case solved through modern DNA technology. It also exposed a troubling truth. Emotional obsession does not fade just because time passes. It can linger, harden, and wait. Sherry had done nothing wrong. She married the man she loved. She trusted that the past was behind them. But someone else refused to accept that ending. Her story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come not from strangers, but from unresolved emotions, left to grow in silence, waiting years, even decades, for a chance to surface. Ryan Poston was 29 years old and already building a promising career. He was a young attorney living in Highland Heights, Kentucky, driven, intelligent, and ambitious. Friends described him as thoughtful and goal-oriented, someone who valued structure and stability. But in his personal life, Ryan was struggling to close a chapter that refused to end. That chapter was his relationship with Shayna Hubers. Their relationship had been on and off, marked by emotional intensity and frequent conflict. According to court records and testimony, Ryan tried multiple times to end things peacefully. He asked for space. He tried to distance himself, but Shayna resisted every attempt at separation. Text messages later presented in court showed a pattern of emotional dependence. Shayna contacted Ryan repeatedly, even when he asked her to stop. Friends said she appeared fearful of losing him and desperate to maintain control over the relationship. What Ryan saw as a breakup, Shayna experienced as abandonment. By October 2012, Ryan was ready to move on. On the evening of October 12, 2012, Ryan had plans. He was preparing to go on a date with another woman, a detail that would later become central to the prosecution's argument. That night was meant to be a turning point, the moment Ryan fully stepped away from a relationship that had weighed heavily on him. But Shayna arrived at his apartment uninvited. What happened inside that apartment would become one of the most controversial homicide cases in Kentucky. At 8:03 p.m., Shayna Hubers called 911. Her voice sounded calm as she told the dispatcher that she had shot Ryan Poston in self-defense. She claimed she feared he was going to harm her. When police arrived, they found Ryan dead on the floor. He had been shot multiple times. The apartment was quiet. There were no signs of a violent struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken objects that suggested a physical fight had taken place. Shayna was taken into custody and questioned. During interrogation, investigators noticed something unsettling. Shayna's story changed. Her explanation shifted. Some of her statements did not align with the physical evidence. At one point, she made comments about Ryan's appearance after he was shot. She even said she fired additional shots so he wouldn't suffer. Those words would later echo loudly in court. Detectives also found text messages showing that Ryan had been trying to distance himself while Shayna struggled to accept the breakup. There was no evidence that Ryan had attacked her that night, no defensive wounds, no indication that he had threatened her life. The case moved to trial in 2015. Prosecutors argued that this was not self-defense, it was a killing driven by emotional turmoil and jealousy. They told the jury that Shayna could not accept Ryan's decision to move on, especially the fact that he planned to see someone else that evening. According to the state, the shooting was an act of control, an attempt to prevent Ryan from leaving permanently. The defense argued the opposite. They claimed Shayna truly believed she was in danger. They painted Ryan as emotionally volatile and suggested she acted out of fear in a moment of panic. But the evidence complicated that narrative. Prosecutors pointed to Shayna's behavior after the shooting, her calm 911 call, her inconsistent statements, and the lack of physical evidence supporting a struggle. They emphasized her interrogation remarks, which sounded rehearsed rather than terrified. The jury deliberated. They found Shayna Hubers guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But the story didn't end there. In 2016, Shayna's conviction was overturned due to a procedural issue. It was discovered that one juror should not have been allowed to serve. The ruling shocked Ryan's family, and reopened wounds they thought had begun to heal. A second trial began in 2018. Once again, the jury heard about the troubled relationship. Once again, they reviewed the messages, the evidence, and Shina's statements. Prosecutors repeated their argument that this was not self-defense, but a deliberate act fueled by fear of abandonment. This time, the jury reached the same conclusion. Shina Hubers was found guilty of murder for a second time. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. For Ryan's family, the verdict confirmed what they had believed from the beginning, that Ryan was killed not because he was violent, but because he was trying to leave. Ryan Poston's case became widely discussed because it forced the public to confront a difficult question: when does fear become an excuse, and when does it become a cover for control? Ryan had the right to end a relationship. He had the right to move on. He had the right to say no. And for that, he lost his life. Lily James was only 21 years old, but those who knew her described someone far beyond her years, kind, energetic, and deeply committed to helping others. She worked at St. Andrew's Cathedral School in Sydney, where she supported students and assisted with daily school activities. Lily loved being around young people. She loved structure, routine, and the quiet sense of purpose that came from knowing her work mattered. In late 2023, Lily had recently ended a short relationship with a colleague named Paul Tyson, who worked as a sports assistant at the same school. The relationship had not lasted long, and from Lily's perspective, it was already over. She wanted to step away cleanly and refocus on her own life. She believed the breakup was final. Paul did not. According to later findings, Paul struggled intensely with the rejection. What appeared outwardly as a calm separation quietly became something far more dangerous. Investigators would later uncover that Paul had begun tracking Lily's movements, monitoring her routines, and planning how and where he wanted to confront her. None of this was visible to the people around them. On the evening of October 25, 2023, Lily went to the school gym area to collect sports equipment. It was a normal task, something she had done many times before. The building was familiar, safe. There was no reason for her to feel afraid. But Paul was already there. According to evidence presented during the coronial inquest, earlier that same day, Paul had walked through the school checking doors and observing the layout. CCTV footage later revealed him practicing movements through the hallways. He placed a cleaning in progress sign in a strategic location, an attempt to subtly guide Lily toward a specific bathroom. What happened next was not spontaneous. When Lily entered the bathroom, Paul attacked her with a hammer. The violence was sudden and extreme. She suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head. There was no opportunity to escape. No warning. Lily died inside the school where she worked, inside a place meant to protect young people. When Lily failed to return home that night, her family immediately became concerned. It was unlike her to disappear without notice. Police were contacted, and a search began. Officers entered the school and made a discovery that would shock the entire country. Lily's body was found inside the building. The news spread quickly. Teachers, students, parents, and staff were devastated. A place of learning and safety had become the scene of a brutal murder. Investigators moved swiftly, reviewing security footage and tracking Paul's movements after the attack. CCTV showed Paul leaving the school shortly after the killing. He traveled toward the coast, abandoning his phone and personal belongings along the way. The next morning, his body was found at Diamond Bay Reserve in Vaucluse. Police confirmed that Paul had taken his own life. The case did not end there. A coronial inquest was launched to understand how the attack happened and whether warning signs had been missed. The findings were deeply unsettling. Evidence revealed that Paul had been monitoring Lily for days. He tracked her location using digital tools. He studied her routine. He chose the setting and rehearsed his actions. This was not a moment of emotional collapse. It was a planned attack. Experts who testified during the inquest described Paul's behavior as controlling and obsessive. They explained that even in the absence of prior physical violence, behaviors such as tracking surveillance and fixation are serious red flags. The coroner later described the killing as an act of gender-based and domestic violence, emphasizing that the danger escalated after the breakup. Lily's family spoke publicly about their grief, but also about their desire to raise awareness. They wanted people, especially young women, to understand that danger does not always look like rage or threats. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it hides behind familiarity. The school community held vigils and memorials. Students left flowers. Teachers spoke about Lily's warmth and dedication. Parents struggled to explain to their children how something so horrific could happen in a place they trusted. Across Australia, Lily's death sparked national conversations about safety, after breakups, workplace awareness, and the risks of stalking behavior. Experts stress that separation is often the most dangerous moment in a relationship, especially when one person feels a loss of control. Lily James had done nothing reckless. She ended a relationship. She continued going to work. She trusted the environment around her. She never knew that someone had already decided her life would not continue without him. Her case stands as a powerful reminder that violence does not always come with warning, screams, or public arguments. Sometimes it comes quietly, carefully planned, hidden behind routine until it is too late. Kendra Hatcher was 35 years old and living the life she had worked hard to build. She was a pediatric dentist in Dallas, Texas, known for her warm smile, her gentle nature, and the way she made even frightened children feel safe in the dentist's chair. Friends described her as kind, optimistic, and deeply committed to her patients. She loved her career, valued her friendships, and believed she was entering a stable, happy chapter of her life. That chapter included a new relationship. Kendra was dating Ricardo Paniagua, a man she cared for and trusted. What she did not know, what she had no reason to suspect, was that someone else was watching from a distance. Someone who believed that Ricardo still belonged to her. That person was Brenda Delgado. Brenda had previously been in a serious relationship with Ricardo. When it ended, she did not accept the loss. According to court records, Brenda struggled deeply with the breakup. Even after Ricardo moved on, she continued monitoring his life, especially his new relationship with Kendra. At first, it was quiet. Brenda followed Kendra on social media. She studied her photos. She learned her routine. She noted where she lived, where she parked, and when she came home. What began as jealousy slowly transformed into fixation, and fixation became something far more dangerous. On September 2, 2015, Kendra returned home to her apartment complex, Gables Park, 17 Inches, Dallas. It was an ordinary evening. She parked her car in the garage, stepped out, and walked toward the building. She never made it inside. A man approached her and fired a single gunshot. Kendra collapsed in the parking garage. She was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The attack was fast, silent, and devastating. Police arrived and immediately began searching for answers. Surveillance cameras revealed that the crime was not random. The gunman had waited. He knew where Kendra would be. He knew when to strike. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something far more disturbing. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a hired killing. According to court documents, Brenda Delgado had organized the murder. She recruited 2 people to help carry out her plan. Christopher Love was identified as the shooter. Crystal Cortez acted as the driver. Brenda promised payment and provided detailed information about Kendra's schedule, residence, and daily habits. The motive was clear. Brenda could not accept that Ricardo had moved on. Kendra represented the life Brenda believed should have been hers. Instead of walking away, Brenda chose to erase the woman she saw as standing in her way. Crystal Cortez was arrested first. During questioning, she cooperated with police and revealed the full scope of the plan. She described meetings with Brenda, discussions about payment, and the instructions Brenda provided. Her testimony led investigators directly to Christopher Love. Love was arrested and charged with capital murder. But Brenda was gone. By the time police closed in, Brenda Delgado had fled the United States. She traveled to Mexico in an attempt to escape prosecution. Her disappearance only strengthened the case against her. The FBI added Brenda to its 10 most wanted list, and her face was broadcast across international media. For months, she remained on the run. In 2016, Mexican authorities located Brenda and extradited her back to the United States. Her return marked the final chapter of a long and complex investigation. During the trials, prosecutors laid out the full narrative. They presented phone records, messages, witness testimony, and Crystal Cortez's detailed account. They showed how Brenda followed Kendra's life step by step, how she studied her routines and turned personal heartbreak into a calculated plan for murder. The defense attempted to argue that Brenda was not directly involved in the shooting, but prosecutors reminded the jury that planning a murder is just as lethal as pulling the trigger. The verdicts were decisive. Christopher Love was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Crystal Cortez pleaded guilty and received 35 years in prison for her role as the driver. In 2018, Brenda Delgado was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for organizing the killing. For Kendra's family, the verdicts brought justice, but no relief from grief. Kendra had done nothing to provoke violence. She had simply fallen in love with someone who was free to choose her. Her life ended not because of something she did, but because someone else refused to let go of the past. Kendra Hatcher's case remains one of the clearest examples of how obsession can evolve into organized violence. It shows how rejection, when mixed with entitlement and jealousy, can lead to devastating decisions that ripple outward, destroying lives far beyond the person who makes them. Kendra never saw danger coming. She trusted the routine of her day, the safety of her surroundings, and the normalcy of her life. And that trust was shattered in a parking garage by a crime planned quietly, carefully, and without mercy. For years, Melinda Stay had been trying to escape. Her marriage to Ronald Lee Haskell had been marked by emotional and physical abuse. According to court records, the relationship deteriorated slowly but relentlessly until Melinda finally reached a breaking point. In 2014, she made a decision that should have given her safety. She left Ronald and took their 4 children with her. She went to stay with her sister Katie Stay in Spring, Texas. Katie opened her home without hesitation. She wanted to protect her sister. She wanted to give her and the children a place where fear no longer dictated daily life. The Stay household became a refuge, crowded, busy, filled with children's voices, but rooted in love and protection. Ronald Haskell saw it very differently. To him, Melinda's departure was not an act of survival. It was betrayal, and he believed the people who helped her leave were responsible. Prosecutors later said his anger did not fade, it intensified. He fixated on the idea that Katie and her husband Stephen Stay had taken his family away from him. That belief became deadly. On July 9, 2014, Ronald Haskell drove to the Stay family home. According to police reports, he disguised himself as a delivery driver to gain entry. Inside the house were Katie Stay, her husband Stephen, and their children ages 4, 7, 9, 13, and 15. They had no reason to suspect danger. When the door opened, everything changed. Once inside, Haskell demanded to know where Melinda was. The family told him they didn't know. What happened next was almost unimaginable. Haskell ordered the family into the living room and restrained them with tape. Prosecutors later described the scene as methodical and controlled evidence of planning, not panic. Then, one by one, he opened fire. Katie Stay was killed. Stephen Stay was killed. 4 of their children were killed. The violence was swift and overwhelming, carried out inside a home meant to shelter a family. 1 child survived. 15-year-old Cassidy Stay had been shot in the head, but she remained conscious. Covered in blood, she lay still on the floor, pretending to be dead. When Haskell finally left the house, Cassidy waited until she was certain he was gone. Then she crawled to a phone and called 911. Her call saved her life and helped police understand what had happened inside the house. Emergency responders arrived to a scene they would later describe as one of the most horrific they had ever witnessed. Cassidy was rushed to the hospital. The rest of her family was gone. Police quickly located Haskell in a nearby parking lot, sitting inside his vehicle. When officers approached, he held a gun to his head and refused to surrender. After a tense standoff, he finally gave himself up. The investigation revealed chilling details. Prosecutors said Haskell had traveled to the house with clear intent. This was not an impulsive outburst. It was an act of revenge, fueled by his inability to accept that Melinda had left and that her family had helped her do it. Cassidy Stay later gave testimony that would become central to the case. Despite unimaginable trauma, she provided clear details about what happened, helping prosecutors reconstruct the timeline and intent behind the attack. Her courage became a symbol of survival in the face of absolute devastation. During the trial, Haskell's defense team raised questions about his mental health. They argued that he was not fully responsible for his actions, but prosecutors countered with evidence of planning disguised travel and deliberate execution. The jury rejected the insanity defense. In 2019, Ronald Lee Haskell was found guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. For the Stay family, justice could never restore what was lost. Katie and Stephen had been devoted parents. Their children were vibrant, full of life, with futures that would never unfold. All of it ended because one man refused to accept that a relationship was over. This case shook the nation not just because of its brutality, but because of its origin. It began with a breakup, with a woman choosing to leave abuse, with a family stepping in to help. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The violence did not come from strangers. It came from entitlement. The vi the belief that losing control justified taking lives. Cassidy Stay survived, but she carries a loss few could ever imagine. Her bravery ensured the truth was known, even as she became the sole witness to the destruction of her family. The Stay family massacre stands as one of the most extreme examples of how dangerous the aftermath of a breakup can become when obsession turns into vengeance. It shows that the most dangerous moment is often not during the relationship, but after it ends. Melinda tried to escape. Her family tried to protect her, and for that they paid the highest price. Each of these stories began the same way. Not with violence, not with hatred, but with a decision to leave. Lauren Ashley wanted space. Emma Walker said no. Matthew Reardon believed a breakup could end peacefully. Angela Gilpin chose her marriage. Travis Alexander tried to move on. Sherry Rasmussen trusted that the past was over. Ryan Poston planned a new beginning. Lily James ended a relationship quietly. Kendra Hatcher fell in love with the wrong man's past, and Melinda Stay escaped abuse, believing distance would bring safety. None of them chose conflict. What they chose was autonomy, the most basic human right to decide who belongs in your life and who does not. And yet for someone else, that choice was unbearable. Across all 10 cases, the pattern is impossible to ignore. The violence did not come from sudden rage alone. It came from entitlement, from the belief that love is ownership, that rejection is humiliation, and that another person's independence is something to be punished. These were not crimes caused by breakups. They were crimes caused by the refusal to accept one. In many of these cases, warning signs were present long before the final moment. Obsession, stalking, emotional manipulation, control, isolation, fixation. Sometimes the signs were loud, sometimes they were quiet. And sometimes, as in Matthew Reardon's case, they were hidden behind silence and despair. What makes these stories so unsettling is not just how they ended, but how ordinary they began. A teenage relationship, a workplace romance, a marriage falling apart, an ex who couldn't move on. These are situations millions of people experience every day without violence. And yet when one person believes they are entitled to another's life, body, or future, love stops being love. It becomes a weapon. For the families left behind, justice never means closure. A verdict cannot replace a daughter. A sentence cannot restore a childhood. Accountability matters, but it does not heal the absence that follows. What remains is memory and warning. These cases exist not to sensationalize tragedy, but to expose a truth we too often ignore. The most dangerous moment in a relationship is often when it ends. If someone refuses to respect boundaries, if they monitor, control, threaten, or guilt, if they cannot accept no as a complete sentence, those are not signs of love. They are signs of danger. The lives lost in these stories deserve futures that were never taken away. They deserve to leave without fear. They deserve to be safe for choosing themselves. And remembering their stories is not about dwelling on darkness. It is about recognizing it early, naming it clearly, and refusing to normalize it ever again. Because walking away should never be a death sentence.